There's a special event for local history fans coming this August. Stay tuned as we talk about the upcoming History Roundtable on this week's edition of Welcome to Groton. Hello and welcome to Groton. Today we have with us Groton historian Jim Streeter and also historian, professor, and author Martin Smith. Welcome, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cindy.
So you guys are obviously enthusiasts, historians. How did you become this? Can you tell us about yourselves? Let's start with Jim.
Well, at previous shows, Cindy, I'm a native of Groton. And beginning in the, we'll say the mid-60s, I developed a keen interest in our local history. And it's just taken on a life of itself. So from the early or mid-60s to now, I've accumulated quite a bit of knowledge about the town of Groton. And not only have I written books, but I write articles for the local newspapers concerning Groton history. And I am now, or have been appointed the Groton Town Historian, have been that for about 10 years. But I learned a considerable amount from my predecessor and my mentor, Carol Kimball. Nice. That's pretty much in the nutshell. I just love Groton's history.
Oh, well, we appreciate all that you give us back on the history. It's amazing. And Martin?
I actually came into history late in life. I started my college studies back in my 30s, and then I went to the University of Pennsylvania where I studied history and did the certification in historical research. So most of my work was done with old manuscripts, rare books, material text, things like that. Kind of fell into doing local history after I took an ethnographic class, and I did a book on the history of Philadelphia. And one thing led to another, and then I ended up in this area for various reasons, and here we are.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. So I know on Saturday, August 18th, you guys are getting together for an event here at the Groton Public Library. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, absolutely. We're having 9 of the authors that wrote titles for Arcadia Publishing and the History Press over the last, I think it spans 15 years almost.
Really?
So there's a large canon of history from this area, and it's all Mystic and Groton titles. So Mystic and Groton is in the name of all the titles.
Okay.
And it covers everything from, people, places, ideas. We've got ghost stories. We've got, we talk. One of Jim's books talks about Groton and Mystic emergency services, which is a very kind of narrow topic, and then it kind of widens out to worldview as well. So you've got a bunch of authors with various backgrounds and educations coming together to discuss these communities that we obviously care a great deal about.
Awesome. Do we? Is this a free event?
Yes, it is free.
Wonderful. So again, that's August 18th, Saturday. So here at the Groton Public Library. You mentioned Arcadia. How is it that you guys went with Arcadia for publishing all of these?
That's an interesting thing for me. As I mentioned, my mentor and previous historian, Carol Kimball, she was contacted by Arcadia to do a book. Simultaneously, I was contacted by Arcadia to do a book on Groton. And we knew each other, and we discussed it. We said, well, let's do it together. And we actually went with another person, Marilyn Comrie, who's also a historian, and she was the night editor for the Norwich Bulletin, working for the Norwich Bulletin. So it was very compatible because Carol had a lot of the knowledge, I had a lot of the pictures, and Marilyn knew how to edit. Plus, she did the layout of the book. So that's how I started with the Arcadia books.
Nice.
I had worked with Arcadia on a previous title about a village in Philadelphia called Powhatan. And it was completely me by myself. I was literally just fumbling my way through how to write one of these books. And so my co-author, Jade Huguenin, who is a local, she's a Navy brat, she's been here most of her life. She worked at Ledyard Parks and Rec. She was in college at the same time I was, and she invited me up one weekend, and we were actually on Main Street in Mystic, and I was like, we really should write a book about this place. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. So one thing kind of led to another, and she had all the knowledge being a local. I had the skill kind of gathering materials and putting everything together. One thing led to another, and we ended up writing what I feel is a pretty good book. So
awesome, great. So how many books have each of you written
Well,
or been part of?
Arcadia-wise, I've co-authored 3 of those. Totally, I have authored 6 books about Groton.
Okay.
And I'm working on the next one as we speak.
Ooh.
I've written 8 books in total. I've written 5 for Arcadia. I've written 2 children's books, and I've written a novel. So
oh, wow.
I've done a little bit of everything. So I mean, I've got a little bit of space there, but the Arcadia work takes up quite a bit of my time. I've done 5 books in 3 states. So.
Wow, and that's a lot of you have to do a lot of research for those.
Oh,
this
absolutely.
isn't you have to know your facts.
Well,
Right, Jim?
You do. Each book contains approximately 128 photographs, or 228 photographs, 128 pages, and you have a caption underneath each one, and you have to be accurate
Oh yeah.
with the information. So that's where the research comes into play. Not only that, but the selection as far as the topics are concerned. You want it to be interesting. Now, in Groton, we have the fire districts, the 8 different districts. So we wanted to cover all those bases. And it's like Martin said earlier, people, places, things, events. So that develops the interest, to purchase the book and have the book. It's a great reference material.
Absolutely.
People are definitely interested in where they live and they take ownership in it. Why so much interest in Mystic, especially since you're not right from the area?
I mean, it's hard not to come up to this place and fall in love with it. It really
True.
is. I mean, you walk in and the drawbridge is there, and you see all the ships. And we devoted, and I had a fascination with boats as a child. So we've got a whole chapter on nothing but boats that have either been in Mystic or they're in Mystic now or whatnot. But it's such rich history, and the history of New England is the history of America. And then when you have somebody that's both as gifted as and enthusiastic about this area as my co-author was, it really makes such a project kind of flow.
Nice. So I know Jim knows so much about the area, but what did you learn new about Mystic in the process?
Everything was new to me. But that being said, I mean, we found a lot of things where there was some landmarks that were in question. Were they in Mystic? Were they in Westerly? Postcard companies had a field day with labeling things that were in the same area in different places. And a lot of the stuff that we went through, we couldn't find, exactly where it was. So we had to go drive out and literally look at, like the Wolves did, which Jim and I have talked about before. We had to drive out to just north of 95 out there by the reservoir in Dean's Mill and find this place to make sure that it wasn't in Westerly like the postcard said.
Oh, wow.
And Jay did an amazing amount of research when it came to that. We were looking at aerial maps, and there was another landmark called Tuxtec Rock we couldn't find. And so we get there and we look across the street and the reservoir's still there and there's this big rock jutting out of the water. And we walk back around to the property and we look at the back of the rock and you can still see the pegs in the back of the rock from where somebody hung a ladder. So it wasn't so much the big stuff. I mean, the history of New England's pretty well settled, but just kind of bringing back things that people had forgotten about or nobody had bothered to write down or anything like that. So, but I learned a ton about the area. I can't even begin to speak to how much I learned. And to Jim's point, you get 128 pages, you get 100 words per caption, so you have to be economic with your words and you have to get across the important points.
That's a really good point, that you have to be economic with your words because you have to be careful what you're saying, but also you want it to be interesting. You guys both hit on the postcards, and I want to get back to that, but I like the way you have to research. You have to drive out there and you have to do it, and you're visually and physically doing the research, you're just not on Google. So that's awesome. How was it working with your co-author, with you down, in Pennsylvania and up here?
I made quite a few trips up. I think in the course of writing the book, I made 8 or 9 trips up. First off, she's phenomenal. She did everything she can to kind of, mitigate and kind of make this a very easy, free-flowing process. And the challenge was we were both in college at the same time. We were both at very high-performing colleges. She was at Smith College and I was at the University of Pennsylvania. Oh, okay. So we're both trying to complete our degrees and we're trying to write this book. And, I'm a father of 2, so I've got that going on. Oh, my gosh. She's working Parks and Rec. And everything that we had going on in our lives, it could have really turned into a disaster quickly. But I have to give her credit. She has a way of managing things that kind of holds things together. And on top of that, she's absolutely brilliant. She's a lot of things, a lot of great things. And so working with a co-author was great, and it's made each process I've had of working with a co-author after that even better as well, pulling
Yeah.
from that experience. So I can't say enough.
It sounds like you both really enjoy working with others on the books, not just yourselves. Like the solo books they're great, but the co-author books are much more fun.
Well, again, with Carol and Marilyn and
Yeah.
myself, it's actually a fun thing.
Yeah.
Because you're sitting there and you're learning. I would
having
mention something, Carol said,
conversation.
I didn't know that. Or vice versa. And then we'd come up with a picture and we'd say, what's that? And so we'd all collaborate on that. And before you know it, we're enjoying it. We're having a lot. It was work, but
Right.
it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And we would meet probably on about every a week and a half to 2 weeks to go through the materials. Again,
Right.
with
You
the
have to
collection
ensure.
between Carol and I, we probably had over 30,000 photographs.
Oh my gosh.
And to cull it down to the 228 photographs, they said, well, I like this one. Well, I like this one. And,
Right.
so it was fun doing.
Wow.
And see, that's interesting, and I'll just kind of jump off that point there too. Jade and I had no collection whatsoever when we started this.
Oh, really?
We were scouring eBay, and we would go to like college archives and borrow postcards, and we talked to historical societies and to museum, and we talked to Ellery Twining, who is an absolutely fantastic guy. He is tied into the Mystic Army Navy story. He wrote the introduction to her book, and he publishes Postcards in town.
Okay.
And he knew the gentleman that ran the book and tackle store in Rhode Island before it closed down. And he had a large part of their collection in his private collection.
Awesome.
So he gave us a bunch of stuff. And so, whereas, you know, Jim had been working on his stuff all his life and he had this massive archive to pull together, we were running to every source that we could find to
Right.
try to pull this stuff together. And we got really creative with it. I mean, you know, but it worked out. You know, we ended up buying like 150 postcards just to make the book
Wow.
happen. So,
This is fascinating. So you had nothing to begin with.
Right.
Like it wasn't something you could just pull up on the internet. You had to go out there and put your feet on the pavement, basically, and get
Exactly.
it going. But that's really cool. When we come back from the break, I want to hear more about the postcards because I know that plays a lot for both of you into this. But can you tell me both real quick, what was each of your first books, the titles?
Well, easy for me.
Okay.
Groton. G-R-O-T-O-N. Groton.
Okay. And Martin?
I had 3 books come out within a month of each other, my first 3, but the one that made publication first was called Little Carl. It's a children's book.
Little Carl?
Yes.
Little Carl,
Yes.
children's book. Okay, wonderful. Well, listen, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back, and I want to talk to you more about this and the postcards and the publishing, all of that. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back to Welcome to Groton.
If you're talking, they will hear you.
Why are we getting killed like this?
Kyle's not here. Got caught drinking beer in the park a couple of nights ago.
Really?
Yeah, 0 tolerance. He's out for the season.
Harsh.
Hey, he knew not to drink. We've made that clear to all of our kids, right?
No, not really.
Bill, if we don't tell them what we expect and why they shouldn't drink, how are they gonna know?
Talk. They hear you. For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
You try.
Sometimes there's no do-over. Some things you can't rewind. That's when an extra safety step could mean the difference between a close call and a call to 911. Simple steps save lives. Learn more at poolsafely.gov.
Hello, and welcome back to Welcome to Groton. We have Martin Smith and Jim Streeter with us today. Guys, we were just talking about your books and all the awesome aspects of research. We talked about a little bit the postcards. Can you tell me more about why postcards are so important in the research?
Postcards are a fascinating part of local history, and the reason for that is that you have competing interests whenever postcards are published. You've got everything from major publishers, especially in New England, coming out of New York City, all the way down to your local coffee shop or your local pharmacy printing these things. And so they provide a record of what was going on in the area at the time, and what it even gives you kind of a business background, what business interests were going on in the area at the time. You would have competing publishers publish the same landmark like we were talking about with different images. Or with different cities, you know, so you end up with one place that's in 3 places.
And why would that happen?
Simply because, I mean, commercial interest more than anything else.
Marketing.
I mean, right. Westerly would be a tourist attraction to certain people, and then Mystic would be to others. Mystic is more the tourist town now, obviously, but back then it was Westerly. So, you figure they're only 20 miles apart in modern day, but 20 miles in the era before the automobile is a long distance. So you may take a vacation and go to Westerly, but you're not going to go to Mystic. So it gave them ample opportunity to use the same landmarks to kind of tap into different business interests. But it even provides kind of a historical perspective of migration and the way people lived in certain areas, and migrant workers would come to areas at certain times and everything else. So I mean, you get a plethora of information off of a little 3x5 card.
Right.
And to piggyback on what Martin's saying, back around the turn of the century, it was a popular collection item.
Yes.
If I lived in Groton and I took a trip to Hartford, that was a large trip.
You'd pick up.
I had a list of people I would have to send postcards from. Now, if they took a trip to Providence, they would send us postcards.
Right.
So it wasn't unusual to find shoe boxes with collections of postcards from throughout the country.
Right.
And again, a hobby. People loved it.
How do you feel about the younger generation, that they should know more about postcards? Like, I feel like we don't see them as much, except for the highly trafficked tourist spots.
Right.
Let me tell you, there are shows you can go to where there are hundreds of dealers of postcards.
Like expos?
And what you used to spend 10 cents for, you can now spend $3, $4, $5, $6. I have purchased for the collection which I provided to the library, 2 or 3 real photograph postcards taken around the turn of the century that I paid $75 a piece for. They're so unusual.
Wow. Now that collection can be seen by anybody when?
Well, my particular collection, I donated to the Groton Historical Society, which ultimately will be coming to the public library here.
Perfect.
Groton, which includes those districts, including Mystic, I had collected over 1,300 postcards.
Awesome. Okay. How do you, I mean, you say you went to the expo, but do you go, are you just in the mom and pop shops? How do you find all these postcards?
We did a lot of eBay work. There's a ton of postcards on eBay, but there's vendors online. There's certain websites that you can go to purchase postcards. Some of them will even just sell you the scan of the postcard if they don't have the physical card anymore. We would go to yard sales, flea markets, museums, anywhere we could go to find a postcard. We were constantly on the lookout. It became like a scavenger hunt.
For the yard sales and the garage sales, did you just randomly pick a yard sale or garage sale to go to, or did you kind of have an idea that they might have these?
Well, it's one of those things where people get rid of the things that they don't want at yard sales. Whereas if Aunt Bernice took a vacation 50 years ago and she bought 3 postcards of such and such town, they would be sitting around. So yeah, I mean, hit and miss. I mean, just pure luck. We would be out, you have to take a break from sitting in front of a desk and researching, obviously.
True.
So we would go out and try to find something to do, and it always managed to come back to the book. We would even get a hold of the photographers that worked for the companies, and we ended up with a collection of slides that were to be used for postcards. So we've got them pre-postcard, but they're still postcards.
Wow.
So
that's really interesting. So even with the postcards, you did research on that with those to get the photographers.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. That sounds really fun. I love it, but it sounds like a lot of hard work too, and sometimes maybe tedious. But so what is the most fun aspect of creating these books?
Again, as I talked with Carol and Marilyn, and I'm sure Martin had the same experience, it's the learning aspect of it.
The gaining
You're coming
of knowledge.
across things to say, wow, look at this. Here in Little Groton or Little Mystic, they had this. They built these boats.
Yeah.
They built these buildings. Look at the streets. Look at that old car that's on the street.
Yeah.
And if you enlarge these, if you really magnify these things, you'll see, geez, I didn't see the woman with the baby carriage crossing the street. I didn't see the 2 people sitting on the sidewalk there. So it's just an interesting, fun thing to learn all this and to discover part of the history of the town of Groton.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of detective work.
Yes.
So would you say that's the most fun part of it?
Well, that and the detective work's fantastic. I mean, you know, aside again, I can't stress working with somebody else, especially who I got to work with. There's certain things that you find out through the course of the book that, you know, either enlighten or disgust you. That's like what we thought was a fountain that's sitting in front of Bake Square Books right now. It used to be in the center of the square there.
Yes.
That wasn't a fountain. That was a horse trough. And
Oh, no way.
one of the postcards we have shows a picture of a child drinking out of this.
Oh,
and
boy.
I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, man. So it's the little things like that. Like we did a lot of research on a guy named Chaz Eldridge, and he was just, you know, he was very eccentric, but he was a great guy, but he was really kind of weird. And just the stuff that we found out about him, and, you know, the oddities always stand out for me. And then, of course, getting to share, you know, what we've published, because, I mean, why write it if you're not going to tell everybody about it? So.
Oh, definitely.
Another fun thing is you have a postcard. You're looking at the picture. Read the writing on the back.
Yep.
Right, yes.
I'm sending this from the Griswold Hotel in Groton. It's a real big hotel, and all the rich people come here. All right? So it's so interesting to read how they relay their stories on the back of these postcards.
I agree.
And it even talks about how, you know, the Postal Service worked. We found out that, you know, mail was done through a relay system in Mystic before everything became, you know, consolidated and big and everything else. And you would see a postcard that was sent at 9:30 on Thursday morning, and it would say, meet me at the Baptist Church at 5 o'clock. And so we were sitting there and we were postulating, is this like a shotgun wedding or something that's going on? And you know, you never you know, it only had an initial, so we never found out all the details, but the stuff that you just see on the back of the cards and the writing is fascinating.
That is fascinating. We only have 4 minutes, so I just want to kind of get it all going. But so how long does it take to put one book together, whether it's with a co-author or solo?
Took us, for the Mystic book, about 9 months between signing the contract and getting the actual product in our hand. So the actual writing process itself took about 3 to 4 months.
Is that with or without the research?
We're researching as we're going. So,
Right.
and again, of course, she knew a lot of things before we got.
Right.
Jade knew a lot of things, so we had all that in our corner when we started. So, yeah, I would say, you know, there's about probably 4 to 5 months of actually writing the book, and then you get editing and post-editing
Right.
and review and everything else. So.
All of it. Jim, would you agree?
The first 2 books, the Groton and Groton Revisited, fairly easy. We had the material.
Yeah,
we
you
had
already
the
had it,
information. The third book, Mystic and Groton's Emergency Services, we went to each one of the emergency services departments to do the research to acquire the photographs. So that one took us about, we were trying to get this one out quickly. Right? It took us about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not too long, but
No.
a good cap of time out of your life.
Oh yeah, it's an investment. It's a labor of love.
And you were going to college and
Yes,
being dad also, so wow. How often do you, throughout all your books, collaborate with other historians?
As far as the history books goes, I've written 2 by myself, I've written 3 by myself, and 2 have been collaborations. With picture books, there's always an illustrator involved, so I mean, there's that. So I mean, usually I'm working with somebody.
Half and half, 3 co-authored and 3 by myself.
Yeah, okay. So when we have the event on Saturday, August 18th, 12 to 2:30, is this, can people ask questions of the authors, or?
Absolutely. We're going to have a moderator, and he's going to lead the first part of it, and then he's going to take audience questions for us, and people are pretty much going to be ask what you will.
Wonderful.
So that'll be fun.
Okay, and again, this is a free event here at Groton Public Library, Saturday, August 18th. And then if they have a book, can they bring the book to have it signed?
Sure, absolutely. And if they don't have a book, copies of each author's book will be available for purchase.
That's my next question. Where can people get a book? How did you know? So how tricky was it for you to, because you have quite a few authors coming. How many?
9.
9. So how tricky was it for you to schedule all of these authors to be in the same room at the same time?
It wasn't that tricky. I mean, most of the authors are local to the area.
Okay.
I'm the outlier, and Dr. Fault, who works up at a university in Syracuse, New York, we're the outliers, so to speak.
Okay.
But everybody else is local. So
Great.
email chains, phone calls, it didn't take long to get it all together, and people were enthusiastic about it. So it was a lot easier getting together than what you would assume.
That's wonderful. So are there any other events coming up pertaining to your books?
Well, as you're aware, with Groton, with all the historical groups that we have, there's constantly something new taking place.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be a lecture, whether it be a book signing, or a historical display, or things of that nature. So you pay attention to the Groton television station's
Yes.
calendar of events. Look at the local newspapers, specifically Groton Times, Mystic Times, things of that nature. And they will list these events when they're coming up. They usually give you a good week and a half, 2 weeks advance notice, but there's constantly, all these groups have something going.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Now, can these books also be found at local bookshops?
Yes, Bank Square has them, Seaport Bookstore has them, there's all the online retailers have them, Arcadia has their own website, you can find them pretty much anywhere.
I just recently went to the Seaport Bookstore.
And you have to throw a plug in for the Groton Library.
Oh, well,
Yes,
yeah, it's Groton
absolutely,
Library
yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we hit on everything, guys. I so appreciate you being here. I know it was cramped, but we got a lot of info out there for everybody. So Saturday, August 18th,
Yes.
12 to 2:30, free event, Groton Public Library on 102 Newton Street, or 117 Groton. If you need more information, you can call the Groton Public Library, but it's a free event. Come down, welcome. Thank you guys so much. I so appreciate it. I loved hearing about it. It's fascinating.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in today with Welcome to Groton. Have a good day.